I'm Lena Reed, and I don't remember a time when I didn't feel invisible in my own family. It was always clear to me that my twin sister Ava was the one who mattered. When I graduated from college, my parents threw Ava a grand celebration, handing her $100,000 to fund her startup. As for me, nothing but a quick remark from my dad. "You never finish anything." That was the last time I ever needed their approval. The next day, I walked away from everything and everyone I thought I had known. The funny thing is, I never imagined what was coming next. Ava drove by my place a few days ago, stopped in her tracks, and called our father in a panic. They had no idea what they were about to see. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt overlooked, especially by the people who were supposed to love you most. I was born in Eugene, Oregon, a small town where the seasons felt endless, marked only by the scent of wet earth and the steady hum of rain on the roof. The kind of place where everything appeared perfect on the outside, even though the inside of my home often felt like something was missing. I grew up with my twin sister Ava, and though we were born together, I never quite felt like I belonged beside her. Our parents David and Linda were good people, but they had their own way of doing things, and somewhere along the way, they decided that Ava was the one to pour all their hopes and dreams into. My father, a software engineer, looked at Ava like she was a mini version of himself, ambitious, outgoing, and sharp. My mother, an accountant, was always measuring, always calculating, but they never seemed to see me the same way. I wasn't as bold, not as loud. I spent my time quietly observing the world, fascinated by the way the light changed in the trees or the patterns that rain made on the windows. From as far back as I can remember, the difference between Ava and me was clear. Ava was always the one getting the praise. I remember our 8th birthday when Dad bought her a high-tech Lego robotics kit. Meanwhile, I opened a chipped watercolor set. Dad didn't even bother to show me how to use it, focusing all his attention on Ava, teaching her how to build a robot. I didn't mind much back then, but as I grew older, it became harder to ignore. Ava excelled in everything she tried, always the star student, the perfect child. I, on the other hand, found solace in things like drawing and reading, but those didn't seem to matter to our parents. They couldn't see the value in what I was doing because it wasn't something that earned money or prestige. To them, Ava was the future, and I was just the extra. By the time we were in high school, Ava had joined the coding club and was winning medals in programming competitions. Dad would call everyone he knew to brag about her victories, his voice full of pride. When I won a state poster design contest, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper, muttering something like, "Paintings don't feed anyone, Lena." It was as if no matter what I achieved, it was never good enough to be celebrated the way Ava's accomplishments were. It hurt, but I learned to stay silent, not out of weakness, but because I knew no words I could say would change their minds. Every compliment I received felt like a fleeting moment, quickly overshadowed by their endless praise for Ava. I spent my college years in Portland studying environmental architecture, trying to build something that could restore what was broken, a far cry from Ava's path, which led her to the University of Washington and eventually to building a tech startup. I didn't have the luxury of their financial support. I worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet, while Ava received a new car from Dad with money for her living expenses. No grand send-off for me, no celebration, just my mom reminding me to not waste money. I learned to live quietly without expecting anyone to notice, and I kept my head down, focusing on my studies and the work I was doing. But as I trudged through those long, cold nights in my tiny dorm room, I couldn't help but notice the contrast between Ava's bright world and mine. She posted photos of her new apartment, her happy life, while I posted updates about late-night study sessions, surrounded by cups of cold coffee and textbooks. I wasn't jealous, but I felt the distance between us grow wider with each passing day. Even when I got sick one winter, no one called to check on me. My mom's voice over the phone was distant cold. "Ava never misses class. Don't be weak." I learned quickly that no matter how hard I worked, I'd never be seen for it. I wasn't what they wanted me to be, and so I kept going. I kept working, kept building my future from the ground up, knowing full well that no matter how hard I tried, no one would ever celebrate me the way they celebrated Ava. And yet, there was a small part of me that still held on to hope, a hope that one day maybe they'd notice me too. But for now, that day hadn't come yet. And then one day, everything changed. A few days after I'd walked away from that dinner, I thought I was done. I thought leaving my family and everything they stood for was enough to move on, to stop feeling the weight of their indifference pressing on me. But then Ava drove by. It wasn't a coincidence, not really. She had been back in town visiting our parents, and for whatever reason she decided to drive past the place I'd made my own in Bend. I was working in the garden when I saw her car pull up in front of the cabin. It was a quick glance, nothing more, but something about it made my heart drop. I stood there frozen for a moment, unsure if I should wave go outside or just pretend I hadn't seen her. The thing is, part of me didn't want to face her again. Not after all that had happened. But there she was outside my gate calling my father. I couldn't hear her voice, but I saw her looking over the property, staring at the changes I'd made, and I knew what was coming. The call she made to Dad wasn't just a friendly chat. It was urgent. "Dad, you need to see this," she said. I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I could guess. It was the first time I realized that what I was doing was finally being noticed. I had built something, and Ava was seeing it. I didn't know what to feel, but I certainly wasn't surprised when my phone buzzed soon after. It was Dad. His voice on the other end was as calm as ever, but there was a slight tremble in it. "Is that your property?" he asked. He was trying to sound collected, but I could hear the hesitation. Maybe he thought I would be ashamed of the place I'd built. Maybe he thought I'd explain myself, offer him some sort of justification for what I had done, but I didn't need to. I had worked hard for this. Every inch of it was mine. "Yes," I said. Bought, built, and coded by myself. The silence that followed wasn't just a pause. It was thick with something I hadn't expected, a sort of recognition, though I wasn't sure what kind it was. He let out a long breath, the kind you take when you're weighing your words carefully. Then he said, "Well, maybe we can invest in it, bring in more capital, more connections." The words felt cold to me, distant. As if his investment, now that I had proven I could make something of myself, was the only thing that would finally make it all right. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I had long since let go of that anger, the resentment that once burned so hot inside me. Instead, I was just numb. I wasn't looking for their approval. I had found something better than their praise. I had found my own peace, my own worth, independent of their expectations. And so I cut him off, not sharply, just calmly, my voice steady. "You already invested in the other twin," I said. "Keep your pattern consistent." There was a long pause before his voice came through softer now. "That's not fair, Lena." I smiled faintly. Fairness had never been the family business. The phone call ended with a gentle click. I put the phone down and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Outside, the air was still, and I could hear the faint rustling of leaves from the trees in the distance. I didn't have to be angry anymore. That was something I had learned over the years, that sometimes walking away was the truest form of strength. And now, standing in my quiet space, I realized how far I had come. They could offer me money or recognition or anything else they thought I needed. But I didn't need it anymore. I had built something real on my own. 2 days passed before I got another sign from them. This time it wasn't a phone call. It was a letter. I hadn't expected it, not after everything that had happened, but there it was waiting for me on the desk when I came back inside after a long day in the field. The envelope was cream-colored, with familiar handwriting in the corner my mother's. I didn't open it right away. I left it sitting there while I went about my evening feeding the dogs, making a simple dinner. But the weight of it sitting there on the table felt heavy. I didn't want to read it. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face whatever they thought they could offer. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a check for exactly $100,000 clipped to a small note. My mother's handwriting was neat, almost perfect. "We're proud now," it said, followed by "Love, Mom." I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. The money, the check, the apology. It all felt hollow. This wasn't what I needed from them. It was just another gesture, another thing that didn't matter. I never needed their money. I never needed their validation. What I needed was something they could never give me, their presence, their support when it mattered most. I walked outside with the check still in my hand. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft glow over the land. The wind was picking up, but I didn't mind. I reached the bio burner and paused for a moment, the check still there, heavy in my grasp. I didn't want it. It wasn't the peace offering I had hoped for. I couldn't accept it. I tore it in half, then in quarters, and dropped it into the fire. The flames caught quickly, and the check turned to ash in front of me. I watched the paper burn, the edges curling up and disappearing into the fire. The note followed, and I let it burn too. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a curse either. But in that moment I felt something shift. Something that had been buried deep within me for so long finally started to rise to the surface. Later that evening, when the fire had died down, I felt a strange sense of calm. The money had burned, but something within me had been set free. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need them to see me, or to ever really be there for me. I had built my own life, one that wasn't defined by their approval. I wasn't sure what would come next. I had no idea how this would end. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going back. I didn't need them anymore. And with that, the road ahead started to feel like my own. It was a week after I had burned the check, and I thought I had moved past it. But like everything else, the past has a way of catching up with you. I was sitting in the small office at the back of the cabin when my phone rang. I wasn't expecting anything. Maybe it was an update on the latest work order from a client or one of the kids in the program asking about a project. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart sank. It was Ava. I hesitated for a moment. It had been 3 years since I last saw her, 3 years since I had walked away from my family. What could she possibly want now? But I answered anyway, the air suddenly feeling too thick, too still. "Lena, it's Ava," she said, her voice a little softer than I remembered. "Can we talk?" I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to say no, to just hang up and keep living my life the way I had been for the past few years, quiet and without interruption. But another part of me was curious, a part that still held on to some hope that maybe, just maybe, something had changed. I took a deep breath and replied, "Okay." She didn't waste time getting to the point. "I saw the place, Lena. The land, the work you've done, it's incredible." I could hear the hesitation in her words. She was struggling with something, unsure how to approach me, maybe even unsure how to approach herself in all of this. For a moment, I just listened. I didn't know what to say. Ava had never been the type to admit anything, let alone offer praise for something she had never expected to see. "Dad's been following your project," she continued, her voice still tight. He wants to invest in it. I know we've had our differences, but he says now that he's finally starting to see the potential in what you're doing. I think he wants to make up for everything." I felt a wave of emotion hit me, something I hadn't expected. Anger, regret. Maybe a little of both, but I didn't show it. I kept my voice calm. "I've already made my decision, Ava. I'm not looking for their help." There was a silence on the other end, long enough to make the tension feel heavy. Then Ava spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were unsure of how to continue. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say I was sorry for everything, for not being there, for not seeing you. I didn't know what I was doing, but I see it now. I see you." It was a strange moment. For all the years I'd spent longing for something from her, something from any of them, it felt surreal to finally hear her admit it. But it didn't make me feel better, not in the way I thought it would. Instead, it just reminded me of everything I had left behind, everything I had worked so hard to build on my own. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice steady. "But I've found something here, Ava, something real. I don't need them to validate it, and I certainly don't need their money." There was a long pause, and for a second I thought she might hang up, but then she spoke again. "I understand. I really do. And I guess I needed to hear you say that. I guess we both have a long way to go, don't we?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to respond. But eventually, I just said, "Yeah, we do." The conversation ended not with a loud bang, but with a soft, quiet click. I sat there for a while afterward, the phone still in my hand, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Ava had finally said what I had been waiting to hear, but it didn't change anything. It didn't take away the years of hurt, the years of feeling like I didn't matter. It didn't erase the countless moments where I had been ignored, belittled, and left behind. I didn't know what to do with that kind of apology, I didn't know if I could forgive her for everything or if I even needed to. But what I did know was that I wasn't going back. I couldn't. I had worked too hard to get here to find a place where I didn't need anyone else's approval to keep going. The next day I took a walk through the fields, checking the irrigation systems and the sensors I had installed. The ground was still wet from the rain earlier, but the sun was starting to break through, casting a warm glow over the rows of crops. I stood there for a long time, letting the quiet wash over me, feeling the cool earth beneath my boots. It was a good feeling, a peaceful one. But even in that peace, I couldn't help but think of the life I had left behind. I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if things had been different, if I had gotten the love and recognition I had always wanted. But I couldn't dwell on that. Not anymore. I had learned something during the past few years, that it was okay to move forward without looking back, that sometimes the best thing you could do for yourself was to build something that was entirely yours without needing anyone else to see its value. It was around that time when I got an email from one of the local tech magazines. They had heard about RootSync and wanted to feature it in an article about sustainability and innovation. The title of the article read, "Young Woman's Eco-Startup Revives Dead Soil in Sisters." I wasn't expecting it, but when I saw it, I realized that maybe this was what I had been working for all along, not the validation of others, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing my work being recognized for its own value. And then not long after, invitations started flooding in for local agricultural conferences, some from larger companies interested in partnering with RootSync. I could feel the shift, the momentum building behind the work I had put so much into. It was the first taste of success I'd ever had that wasn't built on anyone else's approval. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Even with the newfound recognition, I felt a void I couldn't fill. It wasn't until one morning when I was working with a group of students on the farm that I realized what it was. I looked at them, their faces bright with excitement, their hands covered in dirt as they worked on the systems I had created. They weren't there to judge me, to measure me against anyone else. They were simply there, learning from me, growing with me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It's funny how the smallest things can make you realize just how far you've come. One day while working on the farm, I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel in the driveway. It was a familiar sound, one I had heard countless times growing up, the sound of someone arriving, someone I hadn't seen in a long while. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Ava had come back, though this time it felt different. She wasn't just passing through for a visit. There was something in her walk, in the way she held herself, that told me this was no ordinary trip. She stopped her car just outside the gate and stared for a long time at the land, at the farm that had become my new life, the life she had never really understood. She called me first before I even had the chance to say anything. "Lena," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been looking at everything. It's amazing what you've done." I didn't respond right away. I was busy, my hands covered in soil from working in the garden, but I could feel the weight of her words. She had always been the one to win our parents' approval, the one who got all the attention. To hear her now acknowledging everything I had built, not because of their support, but because of my own determination, was unsettling in the best way. I wasn't sure how to take it. I didn't think I'd see it like this, she continued, stepping closer to the gate. I didn't think it would look like something real, something worth seeing. I wasn't angry. No, not anymore. But I couldn't deny the cold wave that washed over me. I had built something out of nothing, something that had finally made sense in my world, but now it was being recognized not by the people who had always been there, but by the one who had never really been there when I needed her. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Yeah, it's real now," I said quietly, not looking at her. But I didn't need anyone's approval to make it happen. She didn't reply for a moment. I could hear her moving closer, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted her to be near me or not. Ava had never been the type to admit fault or to acknowledge anything she hadn't seen for herself. But there she was, in front of me, standing at the edge of the world I had created. "Can we talk?" she asked. There was something different in her voice this time, no longer a tone of superiority, no longer the sharp, self-assured Ava I had known for years. This was the voice of someone who had come to terms with something, maybe even with herself. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and led her to the small porch where we could sit in silence. The cool wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment it felt like everything was still. The world outside seemed so far away, and yet there she was sitting next to me. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Lena," she began after a long pause, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I don't even know if I can forgive myself, but I think I need you to know that I see you now. I never really did before, but I do now." It was the first time I had heard her say anything like that. Ava had always been the center of everything, the one with the dreams, the drive, the constant attention. And here she was, finally admitting that she hadn't seen me for who I really was. It didn't make it easier to hear, but it was a start. "You don't have to apologize for me to move forward," I said softly. "I've moved on. I've created something I'm proud of, something that's mine. That's enough for me." She didn't argue. Instead, she just nodded. Her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, a sort of vulnerability, a soft understanding. "I know," she said. "I guess I always thought I had to be the one to make something out of myself, and I forgot that you were doing that too. But in your own way. I was too caught up in trying to be perfect for them, trying to be the one they could rely on, and I didn't see what you were doing." I looked at her, then really looked at her, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something. Something that wasn't resentment, but maybe something closer to acceptance. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a real one, and for that I was grateful. "I don't need anything from you, Ava," I said, my voice steady, "but I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you seeing me for who I am. I didn't need you then, but I don't mind hearing it now." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I'll always be here. You know," she said. "Even if I don't always show it, I'm here, and I'm proud of you, Lena, more than you'll ever know." It was a quiet moment, one that felt like it held all the years we had spent apart, but something had shifted, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, maybe it wasn't even understanding, but it was something real, something that felt like a step forward, even if just a small one. "I'll take that," I said softly, "but I think it's time for both of us to start building something on our own, in our own ways." Ava didn't argue. She simply nodded, and for a moment we both sat there in silence, the kind that felt peaceful, not uncomfortable. The tension that had lingered for so long between us seemed to dissipate, carried away by the wind that rustled through the trees. It had been weeks since the last time I saw Ava, and in that time life had carried on in a way that was almost surreal. I'd settled into the rhythm of things at RootsInc., the small ecotech company I'd built from the ground up. The land was beginning to show real signs of life, the sensors I'd installed in the fields working better than I could have hoped. The first batch of crops I'd planted were starting to sprout, and with each new green shoot, it felt like my world was getting bigger without the weight of my past holding me down. But even in the peace of that moment, something lingered. The tension between Ava and me wasn't gone, not by a long shot. I had put up walls, sure, but walls don't always stop things from seeping through. I was still processing the conversation we'd had, the one where she finally admitted that she'd been blind to everything I had done. It wasn't easy to swallow. Her apology, though real, didn't erase the years of indifference, the years I had spent trying to prove my worth, not just to her, but to everyone. The day after our conversation, I went back to work, pouring my energy into the farm, into making RootsInc. Something real. But the truth is, I had never been as good at ignoring things as I wished I could be. Every time I sat in my office looking out at the land, I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if my parents had ever seen me like this. Not just as an afterthought or a backup plan, but as someone worthy of their time, their pride. I didn't expect them to change overnight. They had never been the type to change for anyone, least of all me. But that didn't stop the ache that had settled into my chest, the one that came when I remembered that for all my accomplishments, I was still their second choice. The breakthrough came in the form of an email. It was from one of the small local farms I had worked with early on, looking for an upgrade to their system. They wanted to make their operation more efficient and sustainable, and they had heard about RootsInc. The email was simple enough, but it had something I hadn't realized I'd been missing, a kind of validation, not from my parents, but from the people whose work I admired. They didn't need to be convinced of my worth, they could see it for themselves. I replied right away, setting up a meeting to discuss the details. When I hung up the phone, there was a sense of excitement in the air that hadn't been there before. This was it. This was what I had worked for. Not just a few local clients, but a full-fledged network of people who needed what I had created. People who believed in the value of sustainable farming and the systems I had built. But even in that moment, as I started to plan for the future, I couldn't escape the past. A few days later, I found myself standing in front of the farmhouse, looking out at the fields when I saw a familiar car pull up. It was a silver sedan, the same one my parents had driven when they came to see Ava off to college all those years ago. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe they were just passing through. Maybe they wanted to see how things had turned out. Or maybe they were here to apologize. Either way, it was the first time in years that they had made the effort to come to me, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I walked over to the gate, trying to steady my breath. I could see them both getting out of the car, their faces stiff, their smiles tight. My father looked the same as always, neat, composed, a man of logic and reason. My mother, on the other hand, seemed a little more unsure. She never did well with uncertainty, and I could see it in the way she fidgeted with her purse, her gaze darting nervously between me and the land. "Lena," my father said, his voice as steady as it always was, "we wanted to see how you're doing." I didn't respond right away. There was so much I could say, but none of it seemed to matter. Instead, I just nodded, stepping aside to let them in. I didn't need them to approve of what I had done. I had already proven that I could build something real on my own. But still, seeing them here, seeing them finally acknowledge that I wasn't a failure, stirred something inside of me that I couldn't quite name. We walked through the fields together, my father asking questions about the systems I had set up, my mother commenting on how much had changed since she had last been here. They didn't seem uncomfortable exactly, but it was clear they were out of their element. They were used to boardrooms and spreadsheets, not rows of crops and irrigation systems. "We've been talking," my father said after a while, his tone measured as if he were making a business proposal. "And we think it's time for us to invest. You've proven you can make this work, and we want to help you take it to the next level." The offer hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I stopped walking, turning to face them both. My mother's eyes were on me now, softer than before, but still distant. My father, ever the pragmatist, was watching me carefully, waiting for my response. "I don't need your money, Dad," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I've built this myself. I don't need anyone's help." His expression didn't change, but there was a shift in his eyes, something that felt like a flicker of recognition. Maybe he understood. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it didn't matter. I had made it this far on my own. My mother spoke up, then her voice softer than it had been in years. "We just want to support you, Lena," she said, her eyes searching mine. "We've seen what you've done, and we're proud of you. We just didn't know how to show it." There was a pause, and I felt the weight of it, the years of silence between us. I could feel myself starting to soften, but I didn't want to. I didn't need their approval. I had come this far without it. "I appreciate it, Mom," I said, looking at them both. "But this is my project, my work, and that's enough for me." They didn't argue. Instead, they nodded, and for the first time, I felt like I was speaking their language, a language of quiet respect and understanding. They didn't have to approve of me anymore. I had done this on my own. The rest of the day passed without much fanfare. They stayed for dinner, and we talked about the farm, about the future, about everything that had changed. But even in the company of my parents, it felt different. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore. As they left that night, my father gave me a firm handshake, and my mother gave me a quick hug, her arms tight around me but still unsure. When I closed the door behind them, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Maybe things wouldn't ever be perfect, but I had finally built something that was all mine. And that was enough. I didn't expect much when I saw the invitation come through. A conference invite, just a small local gathering for farmers and tech experts, something that barely made a dent in the hustle of daily life. Still, it was a reminder that RootSync was becoming more than just a passion project for me. The email was simple: a conference in Portland on sustainable farming, a chance to present the work I had put in over the last few years. I debated for a long time whether I should go, but in the end, I knew I needed to. When I first stepped into that conference room, I had a lump in my throat. There were people from all over: engineers, farmers, some of the people I had once read about in trade journals. I had never imagined that I would be one of them standing there holding the microphone. At the back of the room, I noticed a familiar face. Logan, one of my early collaborators and an engineer I had worked with on RootSync's initial systems, waved from the back. He had been a big part of the early days back when I was still figuring out how to balance coding with real-world farming applications. He'd helped me install the first sensors on my land, taught me how to run the tests that I didn't quite understand at first. Seeing him here smiling and nodding as I took the stage gave me an unexpected boost of confidence. "Thank you all for having me here," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies that fluttered in my chest. "My name is Lena Reed, and I'm the founder of RootSync. What started as an idea to help farmers sustainably improve their land using technology has grown into a project I'm proud of. And today, I want to share a little bit about that journey." The room was full of faces, some skeptical, some eager, but all watching, listening. I knew that this was my moment to show them that what I had built was real, that it was not just a set of ideas or a dream. This was a tangible system that worked. I started with a story. I talked about the early days when I was trying to get RootSync off the ground, the mistakes, the failures, the countless sleepless nights. I told them about the frustrations I had faced, about the days when it seemed like nothing was going right. But I also told them about the first breakthrough when the system started working as I had imagined it. I talked about the technology that allowed farms to be more efficient, more sustainable. The systems that now monitor moisture, temperature, and soil health, automatically making it easier for farmers to make informed decisions. As I spoke, I noticed people nodding along. Some took notes, others raised their hands to ask questions. And when I finished, the applause didn't feel like an empty gesture. It felt real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than just me. After the presentation, I spoke with a few farmers who were curious about RootSync. They asked questions about the system, the software, how it worked in different environments. I could feel the weight of their questions, the responsibility of the work I had done. But it didn't scare me anymore. For so long, I had worked in the shadows, afraid of being overlooked or dismissed. But now I stood here with people who wanted to know more, who saw value in what I had built. That night after the conference ended, I sat down at the hotel feeling a strange sense of peace. The work I had done, the time I had spent away from family, away from everything that had once defined me, it was starting to pay off. But there was a part of me that still couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind. The silence with my family, the absence of their approval, still lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't that I was looking for their validation. I knew that what I had built was enough. But it was hard to ignore the ache that came with the realization that they had never been there to see it. It wasn't just about the money or the lack of investment. It was about the years of quiet dismissal, the feeling of always being second place, the way I had learned to shrink into the background while Ava took the spotlight. I had built something on my own, and in a way that felt more powerful than anything I could have imagined. But I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if they had been there with me from the beginning. If they had been proud of what I had done, instead of dismissing me as the quiet, second-rate twin. The next morning, as I packed up to head back to Sisters, I saw the same silver SUV that had pulled up outside my house weeks ago. My parents were here. They hadn't called ahead, they hadn't sent a message, they had just shown up unannounced. I felt a strange mix of emotions, surprise, frustration, but also a hint of something else. Curiosity, maybe. What did they want now? When I opened the door, they were standing there, my father with his usual sharp expression, my mother with a hesitant smile. It was the first time I had seen them in months, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "Lena," my father said, his voice calm but firm, "we've been following your work. We've seen the feature in the local paper, the article about RootSync." He paused as if waiting for me to respond, but I didn't. "We want to talk to you about your future." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. After everything, all the years of silence, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what they had to say, but I knew I needed to listen. "Your mother and I," he continued, "we've been thinking. We didn't support you the way we should have, but we see now that you've built something real, something that matters." I was silent for a long time. The words felt like they were floating in the air between us, suspended by the weight of everything that had come before them. "We're sorry, Lena," my mother added, her voice quieter now. "We should have seen you for who you were, not just who we wanted you to be." I stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was the closest I would ever get to hearing the words I had always wanted to hear. But it wasn't enough, not anymore. "I appreciate it," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I've already built my future with or without you. I don't need your apology. I just need you to understand that I'm doing this for myself." There was a long pause, and I could see my father's face soften just slightly. Maybe they had finally understood. Maybe they hadn't. But it didn't matter. I had made my choice. I was building something real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally found my place. It's strange how quickly everything can change, but how long it can take to realize it. I had built something Rootsync was growing. The work was meaningful, and yet I wasn't entirely sure if I was happy. It wasn't about the project. That had turned out just as I had hoped, maybe even better. But something inside me was still unsettled. Maybe it was the way the past kept finding its way back, in how old habits would resurface when I least expected them. That day in the conference room, when I had spoken about Rootsync to a room full of farmers and engineers, I felt something shift inside me. There was no denying that the project had a life of its own now. It wasn't just something I dreamed about anymore. It was real, tangible. But when I closed my laptop that night and sat in the quiet of my small cabin, I wondered if there would ever be a time when I felt like I had made it. I wasn't looking for praise anymore. I knew that much. But I also knew I couldn't shake the feeling that something somewhere was still missing. I didn't want to dwell on it. I had too much to focus on, too much work ahead of me to let myself fall into old patterns of questioning my worth. The next day, a group of interns I had hired for the summer showed up eager to start working on the farm. The excitement in their faces reminded me of why I had started this in the first place, to teach, to help people understand the value of what I had built. The students were young, bright, and filled with energy. They didn't care about the years of neglect or the years of feeling overlooked. All they cared about was learning, and I was there to teach them everything I knew. That evening, as I wrapped up the day, I sat on the porch looking out over the land. I could hear the wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves in the distance, and I felt a small sense of peace settle inside me. It had taken me years to get to this point, but I was here. I had finally built something of my own. It was real, and I had earned it. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Logan. "Hey, Lena, just checking in. Everything going okay with the new systems? Let me know if you need anything. I'm happy to help however I can." I smiled, feeling a quiet appreciation for the people who had stood by me. Logan wasn't just a colleague. He had been there through the early stages, helping me with technical problems I didn't know how to solve. He had believed in this project before it was even close to being functional, and for that I would always be grateful. I replied quickly, "Thanks, Logan. Systems are going well. I'll reach out if anything comes up." It was a simple message, but it grounded me. I wasn't in this alone anymore. People cared. I cared. And that was enough. But then just as I was about to put my phone down, I saw another notification. This one was from Ava. I hesitated before opening it. It had been a few weeks since we last spoke, and I had assumed that maybe she had moved on too. But I couldn't ignore it. Not now. I opened the message, and it was short, just a few words. "Lena, I've been thinking. I know this may not mean much, but I'm proud of you. I see everything you've done, and I know it's not easy. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. I hope we can talk soon." I stared at the message for a moment, the words almost too much to process. It wasn't a grand apology, and it wasn't a big declaration of change. But for Ava, this was something. This was a shift. I thought about how much I had wanted to hear those words, how much I had wanted her to see me for who I was, for what I had built. But now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. I had come so far, had built my life and my future without needing anything from her or anyone else. I wasn't sure if I could just pick up where we left off. But there was still something inside of me, something that wanted to believe we could start again. The next few days were filled with meetings and work, and before I knew it, the weekend had arrived. The weather was perfect sunny, with a slight breeze, the kind of day you didn't want to waste inside. So I decided to take the morning off and go for a walk. I wandered through the fields looking at the progress we had made. The land was coming alive in a way I had only dreamed of when I first started. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough for me. As I walked, I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't a sudden realization, but more like something slowly falling into place. For so long, I had fought to be seen, to prove my worth to a family that never seemed to notice. But now, in this moment, standing alone in the fields, I understood something I hadn't before. I had already proven it. I didn't need their validation anymore. And that's when it hit me. I had everything I needed right here. I had built this. I had created something that mattered, and I had done it on my own terms. When I returned to the cabin, I saw another message from Ava. This time it wasn't a long apology or an acknowledgement of my work. It was just a simple question. Would you want to meet up, maybe talk? I thought about it for a while. I wasn't sure if I was ready. But the thought of closing that door entirely didn't sit right with me either. So I sent her a message back, simple and to the point. Sure, we can meet. Let's talk. The decision was made, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I knew I was strong enough to face it. I had built my life from the ground up, and no matter where that conversation with Ava went, I was ready. The day I met Ava again in that little cafe outside of Portland felt different. There was no urgency, no bitterness. I had walked into that room knowing what had happened between us, the years we had spent apart, and the choices we had made. But when she smiled at me, just a simple, quiet smile, everything seemed to fade. There were no expectations, no apologies, no grand declarations. We spoke about what had been, about where we were now. It wasn't a conversation meant to undo the past, but to accept it. Ava told me about her struggles with the startup, the moments she had questioned herself, the isolation she had felt in her own way. And I listened not to judge, but just to understand. It wasn't easy, Lena, she said, her voice steady but honest. I don't think I realized what you were going through. I didn't see how much you were doing. And I'm sorry for that. I nodded, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. But I didn't need her apology to move forward. I didn't need her to make things right. What I needed was for her to see me, and she finally had. That was enough. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about the farm, the work I'd done, the small victories I had celebrated by myself. And we talked about our parents, too, about how they never seemed to understand and how in some ways we had been left to figure things out on our own. You've done so much, Lena Ava said, her voice quiet. You've built something real, something that matters. I looked at her then, and for the first time I realized she wasn't just speaking to me as her sister. She was speaking as someone who saw me for who I had become, not who I was in the past, but who I was right then. And in that moment, I knew we both had found our way, not in the way we had once imagined, but in the way we needed to. When we left that cafe, there was no grand gesture, no promise of closeness that would erase the years we'd spent apart. But there was something quieter, more enduring, a mutual understanding, a shared respect. The next few months passed in a blur. RootSync continued to grow, more farmers signed on, and the work became more rewarding every day. I had built something that mattered, something that was changing lives, and I was doing it with a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. But what really stayed with me long after the conference and the meetings was how everything had shifted with one simple change. I had stopped seeking validation from others. When I stopped looking for approval from my family, from Ava, from anyone, I found my true strength. It wasn't in what I had accomplished or in the recognition I had received. It was in the quiet certainty that I was enough just as I was. One evening, while I sat at my desk going over plans for the next phase of RootSync, I received a message from Ava. It was short, just a few words: "I'm proud of you, Lena, and I'll always be here no matter what." I smiled to myself, feeling something warm spread through me. It wasn't the apology I had waited for all those years, but it was a kind of closure, the kind that didn't require anything from anyone, just acceptance. That was the lesson I'd learned over the last few years. The only approval I needed was my own. I had built something that mattered, and I had done it without the approval of the people who were supposed to love me. But I realized that in the end, it wasn't their approval I had needed. It was my own. In the months that followed, things started to feel complete in a way I hadn't known was possible. RootSync flourished. I continued working with the interns, teaching them everything I had learned. I took on more projects, expanded the system to more farms, and watched as the technology I had created began to spread. But even as the work continued, I always came back to the quiet moments, the ones when I would sit outside listening to the sound of the river near my cabin or feel the warmth of the soil beneath my hands. Those moments reminded me that the work I was doing wasn't just about technology or success or even recognition. It was about creating something that could help others, something that was part of the world around me, not separate from it. And slowly I began to let go of the past. Not because I wanted to forget it, but because I realized that it had brought me here to this place where I had learned to be strong on my own. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I had already done that. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were still moments when I felt the weight of the old wounds, when I wondered what it would have been like if things had turned out differently. But those moments became less frequent, and over time, they stopped mattering as much. What mattered now was the life I was building, the work I was doing, and the quiet peace that came with knowing I had finally found my place on my own terms. So if you're out there feeling like you're invisible, like no one sees what you're capable of, let me tell you this. You are enough. You don't need anyone's approval to make your dreams come true. You just need to believe in yourself. Because in the end, that's the only validation that matters. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If you've ever felt like you had to prove yourself, or if you're still working on building something of your own, know that you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine. And remember, you are enough.